So let me introduce myself. So this is Intro to Risk Management. I'm Ron Sweet. I've been at UTSA for I don't know how long. It's probably coming up on 30 years. I was teaching at UTSA while I was at USAA. I retired from USAA in 2009. At that time, I was teaching 5 classes a year. No, 6 classes a year. Now I'm teaching 8 classes a year. So when I retired from USAA, I picked up a couple classes, but essentially I got a lot more time, so I could really dedicate to teaching. I left USAA on the investment side, so I was head of equities. They've now outsourced all of that to Victory Capital. Still have a very strong, close relationship with Victory Capital. They do interview and hire students. In fact, they hired one person right out of this class last year. And he's there now on their trade desk. So Victory Capital still has a good connection with UTSA, loves UTSA students. Um, my background in risk management is I've never worked in the risk management department at USAA, but worked very closely with them. We'll talk some about that. When I started in finance, the risk management department was one guy named Jerry who worked in our department. That's now a department over 1,000 people, I think, the last I heard. Massive. So we'll talk about how risk management has changed from a guy named Jerry buying property insurance and liability insurance to it being a group of 1,000 people, which actually to my mind seems like too many people. We'll see if the new CEO is going to pull back on their very large employee base now. USA does hire a lot of UTSA students, loves UTSA. So hopefully the company will keep going strong. But I'm going to argue, and you'll see in this class, while I wasn't in a department called risk management, I worked real closely with them. I think everybody in finance, everybody, obviously, if you're an actuarial major, is a risk manager. Risk is so central to what we do in finance. If you think about my career, I retired from USAA in 2009, right after a really, really horrible year. The stock market was down over 35% in 2008. 2008 was by far my best year at USAA, and I'll talk about that. I do really, really well in bad years and kind of mediocre in good years. It's just part of my philosophy and how to handle risk. We'll talk about different approaches to managing risk, and I'll give you some of my scenarios from USAA and why I managed their stock risk and pension risk. In fact, we'll talk quite a bit about pension risk and what asset liability management means in this course. So there's a lot of really practical stuff in this class. It's my favorite class to teach. It's a class that covers stuff that you don't see in a lot of other classes. And it's very, very topical. It's especially topical if you interview with a bank, an investment bank, or an insurance company. This is central to what they do, but it's also very important with all other entities. Managing risk, understanding risk is really important. You really want to work a risk discussion into an interview. And I'll give you some material in this class that you can do that, how you can answer some really, really good questions related to some of the questions they're going to ask. Risk is a good topic to bring up. It shows that you're current with what's going on in finance, what's so critical. We just saw a big risk event with 2020 and COVID, and then another risk event in 2022 with inflation. We have a new president. We have a president of China says that he's going to take over Taiwan sometime in the next few years. No telling what that's going to do to a possible World War III or to what goes on in the semiconductor market. Taiwan's an awfully important country to a lot of technology. There's some other areas I'm trying to bring in. I'm going to try to bring some speakers. So there's areas, especially at the end of the class when we do case studies. There's some case studies I want to talk through that are more recent. One I did in a class 4 years ago was, and y'all may not remember this, but we had that heavy snowstorm, I think in March a few years ago. I can't remember exactly when, but we lost electricity. I lost electricity for 5 days, and temperatures much, much colder than what we're seeing even this week. And the state of Texas just really messed up. So I had a former student who was working very closely in that area, came and spoke to the class on where ESCOT messed up. and the planning problems that they had. I have a student in New York. I'm going to try to contact him. He's doing risk management for the city of New York. He sent me his document, and one of the things he talked about was earthquake risk. And he wrote that before New York had their earthquake. And I remember reading it and thinking, earthquake, wow, he's covering everything. I didn't think New York had earthquake risk. And then sure enough, shortly after that, they had an earthquake. I might ask him to come and speak to the class and what he's seen. It was a really, really excellent document. So it's very topical. It's a really good topic to have in your arsenal when you get into interviews. There's a lot of what we'll do in this class that we do a lot in finance. And so I do teach this class from a financial standpoint. I don't teach it in traditional risk management, which is more insurance focused, because I teach two insurance classes and I've focused that on the insurance classes. Plus, the insurance aspects of this can get really boring and can be a lot about contracts and wording and exceptions and all those kind of things. So I'm teaching this from a financial standpoint. I'm using a group of 30s definition of and list of risk. And then you're going to see this entire class is going to be really focused on defining, measuring, mitigating risk in different categories: interest rate risk, price risk, liquidity risk, credit risk. So we're going to tackle each one of those, talk about how do you define it, how do you measure it, and how do you mitigate it. We'll talk about things like immunization and diversification and risk financing and control and hedging. We won't talk much about insurance here, although we will talk about hedging with options, which is somewhat of a quasi-insurance approach to risk. So we're going to be talking about some really powerful things. Some of the parts of finance, I think we get this really, really right and do extremely well. This is an in-person class, so I've had students try to convert an in-person class into an online class. I'm not up for that. I'm not gonna let you do that. So if you just cannot come to class, then drop the class. The only way I'll let a student take a class online is they have to take it as independent study, which doesn't look as good on on their transcript. But if you're in the class, you need to show up. If the student misses more than 50%, there's just no way they're going to pass the class. So attendance is important. I will have all classes on Zoom and should be recording them. And if you've had me before, I put all my classes out there on YouTube so that you can watch it. You can make up 3 classes by watching the YouTube and sending me your notes. So you can make up 3 classes. After 3, it does start affecting your grades. So attendance is critical to me. I might on Thursday talk a little bit more about attendance. I don't like doing it when we're online since it's kind of strange. I don't count attendance the first week anyways. So if we have something where we have to cancel class, I don't like canceling classes, so I'll probably convert it to a Zoom class anyway. Um, but yeah, attendance is important. I need to get to know who you are. I do a lot of recommendations for jobs. I occasionally have a student ask for a recommendation. I have no earthly idea who they are because I've just never seen them. Especially during COVID, I had some students that did well in the class, but I never saw them because of COVID. So I need to know who you are. You probably want to come and introduce yourself to me after class, talk to me, ask questions, come meet with me in my office hours. You should do that with all your professors. We're a really good resource for you. I will throughout the semester, as I get job offers, I'll put them on Canvas. And if you're interested in them, let me know. If you do well in a class, I'll definitely, or if you've done well in previous classes, I can definitely put a word in for you. I have a few employers that I have a pretty good sway with. So so watch out for jobs like that. Um, what we're trying to do in this class is take material you've done in other classes, but really, really specialize it in unique ways that you probably haven't seen done before. So you've maybe have done interest rate swaps in another class. I know Catapacum does interest rate swaps. If you haven't, don't worry about it. I'm going to teach them from scratch. But if you have seen them, you'll get to see them in a unique way and how a bank uses interest rate swaps to manage interest rate risk. We'll talk about balance sheet immunization, which is one of my favorite topics. So we'll be getting into some material that you've seen somewhat before, some of the statistics, some of the measurements that you've used before. We'll use them here, but maybe in a different way. And we may even challenge some of the things that you got in the textbook where the textbook says they work perfectly. And I'm going to challenge that and say maybe they don't work as well as we think in finance. There is no textbook in this class. I do provide my notes and PowerPoints on Canvas. There's some articles and blogs and some videos we'll watch. Um, in fact, one class I will give a walk for one class to allow you to watch a video I really like. One by Doug Hubbard and by Kahneman. Some really good videos that cover material that I think is really critical to this course, especially later in the class. So I'll make those all available to you. We have 2 exams and a paper and a project, although I sometimes mix up the words paper and project, so I might talk about paper 1 and paper 2, but I am officially calling it paper and a project. The hardest part of the class is 2 things. For those that haven't had me before, or even if you had me before, this class is a little different. The hardest thing, which is I want you to get started on this week, is the first paper, the risk assessment paper. It is a tough paper. I've been tempted to change it to other things, but it is so valuable. Especially if you interview with a bank. We're going to be talking about material you probably have never seen before, but is extremely important to understand. So I'm exposing you to some really critical part of finance that just gets ignored or sometimes just forgotten about in undergraduate. So you want to start thinking about that, and tonight I'll help you get started on that. The risk project is probably the easiest part of the class, so don't worry about that at all until we get to it. I have a video that walks you through exactly what you need to do on that. It's a very traditional portfolio risk management class project. Fairly straightforward. Most students do well on that. So the hardest part of the class is risk paper 1, and then the second hardest are the essays on the exams. You don't need to worry about that until we get to the first one. And we get to the first one, I'm going to try to really help you prepare for the essay. And where students really struggle is, especially students that have been primarily multiple choice exams, these are not easy essays. They're quite in depth. I love them. These are my favorite questions to ask. Um, and they have a long discussion, and what students struggle with is they think I want a really shallow, skimpy answer, and I don't. I want a really deep, comprehensive answer. I will give you rubrics to help you, but I want comprehensive, in-depth answers. They are on the exams, but they are open books, so you don't have to memorize it all. I have had them memorized in the past, and then COVID hit, and I really thought, okay, they're going to be open book and the grades will go up. And then I discovered even after COVID with open book, the essays were no better than they were when they were closed book. So I'll make them open book. You can write them, but the key for the risk paper is to start now. And the key for the exam essays is to work on them as we go through them in class and get them done before the exam. So where students really mess up in this class is they work on the risk paper the week before it's due, and they work on the exam essays the week before the exam. That is disaster. That will not work at all. So I'm going to try some tricks this semester to try to protect the procrastinators from themselves. I will argue procrastination is death for finance in the profession. So I run my classes the way the finance profession works. You just cannot procrastinate in this field. So much of finance, the career field, is you're sitting there with no one. It's very autonomous. It's not like an accounting job. I was an accountant for my first 3 years. Yeah, in accounting, you know what to do every day, and there's someone banging on your door every single day for something. In finance, you can sit there 3, 4 months without anyone asking for anything, and suddenly you got a massive amount due. That's the way my classes are. I'll go 5 or 6, 7 weeks, and then suddenly you got an exam, you got an essay, or you got a paper. Some students really struggle with that. They want, give us more grades, more items, more stuff. I give you 4 massive things, and you just got to get started on them. So use this class as a way to practice not procrastinating. Attendance, if you come every class, or if you come every class and miss 3 and make up those 3, you can get 20 points added to your grade. So I do give bonus points for good attendance. And then if you take the instructor survey, you get another 10 points. So you can get 30 points added. I know in some of my classes I do team. I've thought about doing teams in risk management, but we just don't have the time in the class, so we don't have a team competition. But you can get 30 points added if your attendance is good and you do the instructor survey. So that can help quite a bit. Um, Here's my office hours. Um, I'll see how my office hours go. Mondays and Wednesdays at 2. The UTSA Investment Society has our dashboard team meetings. If you're interested in that, I highly recommend it. On Mondays, we do a dashboard team meeting where we look at economic factors and markets for the prior week and talk about what happened in markets. And then on Wednesday, we look at individual stocks, and we're going to be doing strategies on Wednesday. So this next Wednesday, next week, we're going to roll forward what we call our PEG ratio strategy. That's been doing extremely well. We're going to rebalance that. And then I've got a new strategy we're working on. It's a small cap value strategy that I have ready to roll, and we'll execute that. So we're not using live dollars, although I've thought about doing some of these with live money. I might do the small cap one with my own portfolio, but we set them up in Bloomberg, and we monitor them, and we somewhat incubate them to see how they're doing. So that's Monday, Wednesdays at 2 o'clock. That's part of my office hours. So from 2 to 3:30 or so, I'll be in the dashboard team meeting. If you need to meet me then, I can meet with you, but I might be a little bit distracted with the dashboard team. But I'm available a lot of other times, especially on paper one. If you're having struggles, I'm on a bike every single morning. Um, so you're always welcome to just call me, and I can talk to you. I've done 2 hour discussions with students on a bike about careers. So feel free to call me and I'll talk to you. But if you haven't had me before, I highly recommend, especially on paper one and essays for exam one, that you come to me before the due date and make sure you're on track, because some students, they don't realize I'm a little bit radical as a professor. I really require depth in getting into the details, because that's actually the important part of risk management. The high level fluffy stuff really doesn't do you much good. And so I can protect you. I won't tell you do this and this and you get an A, but I'll definitely tell you if you're in serious trouble of a low grade, I can protect you. So I highly recommend take advantage of it. If you don't like my office hours, I'm free a lot of other time. If you need to meet with me Sunday night at 6 o'clock, I'll meet with you. So if you can't find a time to meet with me, I'll find a time, and I want you to do well, but I also want you to put the work in. You can email me at my personal email or at the UTSA one, or if you email on Canvas. I don't see the Canvas ones as fast because I don't click into Canvas every single day, but I'll eventually see it. If you text me, I do get text. I sometimes forget about text. So if you text me and don't hear back, then you might want to follow a text up with an email. But I'll make the time for you. I'm on campus more than my office hours show. And so especially Tuesdays, Thursdays, um, I've got a lot of free time Tuesdays and Thursdays because I don't have any other classes until our 7:30 class. Anybody have any questions on contacting me? I'm losing my voice. Always lose my voice the first week. I'm not used to talking so much. All right, so let's talk. Let me get you started. I'll let you out some early tonight, but I want to get you started on this first paper. So this first paper, you're going to pick a bank, and I'll show you the banks you can pick from. You can pick other ones if you talk to me, but we really need to look at them. And you're going to do a risk assessment of the risk management section of that bank. And your focus, and we'll talk about the focus, is going to be really on price risk. And I'll talk about that some as we get into the project. But the key right now is to pick that bank you want to do, and I'll show you what those are. That risk paper is not due until March 21st, which is after spring break. So you might think, well, I don't need to start it until after spring break, but that would be a disaster if you did that. We have our first exam before. You really want to get this paper 95% written before spring break, and you actually want to get started on it right away. It's a tough paper, and I'll show you why it's a tough paper. It can be a time-consuming paper unless you spread it out over several weeks, hit a little bit at a time. We will do some in-class work on it in teams, and maybe even some outside of class where I meet with your group that's doing the same bank. You're not doing it as a group. It's an individual paper, but several students will be working on the same bank. So if 5 students are doing JP Morgan, I'll meet with those 5 students to make sure everybody's up to date, doing what they need to do. So we'll have some check-in points to make sure um, you're on path to get it done in time, because you do have quite a bit of time. But you can see we don't do our first grade. You don't get your first grade until March. So we go a long way without you knowing what's going on. And I don't know when um, midterms are. So and it's kind of a challenge if the midterm is after exam, I mean before exam one, and everybody just gets a B on midterms. So this is the way finance is. You've got 4 things, and they all hit it one time at their particular point, and you got to be ready when that time comes. And if you're procrastinating until then, you'll do extremely poorly in this class. So let's talk about paper one, unless someone has a question up to there. Any questions? No one's on video, so I can't tell if y'all are actually there. So let me show you, let's look at JP Morgan. But before you do that, let me show you what banks you could select. I'll put the annual reports of the banks out there. I have the ones from last year out there right now. And so if you look at these banks, as soon as you pick a bank, email me what bank you want to do, or if you want to put it in the chat tonight. So you really want a major bank, a money center bank, or one of the farmer investment banks. You really want those, and I'll show you why, because it has to do with how their annual reports are written. I've had students say, I want to do Frost Bank. Frost Bank doesn't work well, mainly because their risk management section or annual report is just not fully fleshed out. It's not nearly as extensive. You definitely can't do a USAA bank. As many problems that they're having right now, and as serious as their problems are, they're not a publicly traded entity, so it's hard to get that kind of data. So there are some in between banks that might work, like a PNC or someone, but I would recommend you stick with one of these major money center banks. So Bank of America, Citibank, Goldman, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley. I got 2 Morgan Stanleys in there just because I forget, they had 2 documents for some reason, and Wells Fargo. So there's 6 major ones. And once you pick your bank, let me show what you do next. So I'm going to do JP Morgan first. So if you go to JP Morgan, just Google JP Morgan annual report. And when you do that, you can probably get their 2023 right now. I doubt you're going to be able to do 2024, but you just click on their annual report and you'll get their annual report. And so click on 2023. And when you click on their annual report, you can see it comes up. It's 364 pages long. What we're looking for is the risk management section. For JP Morgan, that starts on page 124. If you're having trouble finding it, it can be tough. If you search on the word risk, it's probably in there a million times. So that's not going to help. You can look in the table of contents and try to find it, but every one of these banks will have a major section. I mean, major section on risk management. Let me just walk you through what's in it, because your paper is going to do the overview of the bank, which is this first section here. What is their general process for risk management? Which risk do they monitor? What's their risk universe? Who's involved? How's the board involved? How's the audit committee involved? How's the CEO involved? What committees do they have? All right. It's quite cumbersome, this part. You want to read it, but you can't read it all in one setting. If I were you, I would maybe take this section and copy and paste it into Word so that you can edit and delete and keep the stuff you want. Find some way that you can get onto this data. But they'll start off with a philosophy of their risk management. So every major bank, risk management's a huge part of what they do. So you're looking at the general framework. Now, one thing I think is interesting, you take a JP Morgan and go to their mission statement. So here's JP Morgan, who we are, about us. Risk should be central to what they do, but if you do a search on the word risk on their mission statement, it doesn't exist. The word risk is nowhere in here. They say, what is our purpose? Supporting global and local economies by delivering value to our shareholders is only as strong as the communities we serve. They use the word strong, which somewhat implies risk management, creating opportunities for financial growth. They don't have the word risk in there. You might try that. You might search if you're doing Bank of America or Citibank. You might search for their mission statement, their core principles, their core values. See how far down you have to go until the word risk shows up. You might read the first few pages of their annual report. How many pages in until you see the word risk? I think risk should be dominant in their mission statement. And the reason I believe that as a taxpayer is we as taxpayers are standing behind this bank because of the FDIC insurance, because of the bailouts in 2008. I think we as supporters, taxpaying supporters of these entities, would want to see the word risk management prominent in their mission statements and the purposes. So that's something you could bring out about the bank. Why isn't the word risk on their page that tells you what this bank's all about? They even have their business principles, how we do business. You click on that page and you search on the word risk and it's just not in there. Doesn't exist. I find that amazing. Working toward a stronger future. We power economic growth. We uplift communities. We champion opportunities. We are a great place to work. We manage risk well. That should be something there. He keeps using the word strength. That somewhat implies good risk management, but he just doesn't say that. He says, our business is defined as exceptional service, operational excellence, a commitment to credit integrity, winning culture. That's its four tenets. Why isn't risk management one of its four tenets? I would have five tenets, and one of them would be superior risk management. They don't have that. So, you might try this as the first few weeks as you're getting into it. Where is the word risk in this entity? And I'm going to say it's really important. The reason I say it's really important, when you go to their annual report, you come to the risk section, you're going to discover it's a massive part of their annual report. It goes on for pages and pages and pages. All right. So one thing you're going to start with, the big part of this, is the overview section. What is their philosophy of the risk? What risks do they manage? How does this fit into the mission and core values of the firm? Those are the kind of things that you're looking for to understand this firm. You might even try things like going to YouTube and Googling JP Morgan in risk management, or Jamie Dimon in risk management, or something along those lines. Try to find the CEO talking about risk. I'll give you some websites that you can also use to help understand certain banks and their risk management. You can look at their credit ratings. Obviously, JP Morgan is one of the stronger ones out there. But there's a lot of things you can do to give some good aspect of the firm. I'm starting at the risk management section, but you can definitely read the introduction, the first part of the annual report. It is pretty lengthy. If I load it from the beginning and type the word, search the word risk, when does the word risk come up? It's on page 1. It's in a footnote on page 1. So where is that? Refer to liquidity risk management, capital risk management. Those are the kind of things you're looking for. And then you have the risk management section. So you really want to read the introduction section word for word. You can see they have some really, really good stuff you can pull into your paper. You're essentially taking this section, and I'll give you the organization for the kind of things you're looking for, but you want to put it into your own words. So you don't want to just copy and paste in. You can have sections where you quote management or quote the annual report, but you want to avoid it being all quotes. They talk about drivers of risk, and then they give their universe: strategic risk, credit risk, investment risk, market risk. We're going to talk quite a bit about where our focus on this paper is on market risk and operational risk. We're going to talk in class about all of these: strategic, credit, investment, market, and operational risk. But your focus on this paper is, after you do the introduction section, which is a big part of the paper, is on market risk. They talk about the players. They have a risk management function. They have an actual function in the firm. They have the CEOs involved. They have the board involved. They have a chief risk officer. That's something you want to talk about. Who is that person? Right after I retired from USAA, they hired their first ever chief risk officer. My former team set up a lunch with her and me, so she could just get my aspect on it, because I have a strong opinion on risk, and I wanted to give her some insights on it. But yeah, USA has really beefed up its risk management side, and even then, you see this terrible headlines about their bank and all the risk problems they're having. Just because they have a risk officer doesn't mean they've got risk under control. Um, so they start talking about what each person does. They oversees and delegates authority to the executives. So who are all these people? Then they start talking about the actual process. They say I have 3 lines of defenses. What is that? We got the lines of business. You've got the board. You've got these firm-wide committees. They talk about these different things. And then you get these crazy charts, which shows all the risk functions. And you want to get some sense of this. You don't necessarily want to talk about all these. One of the things, we'll talk about this in class, is this convoluted or is it clear? Is it obvious what this committee does or this group does versus what this group does? You've got internal audit sitting over here, independent of everybody else. What does that mean? What power do they have? You have a firm-wide risk committee, but you also have an asset liability committee and a firm-wide valuation committee. What does the firm-wide valuation do versus the firm-wide risk committee do? So we'll talk about this some in class. At USAA, we had one firm-wide committee. It was called the Corporate Asset Liability Management Committee. It's kind of appropriately called the CALM, C-A-L-M. One committee. We didn't have multiple of them. And the CEO sat on that committee, and I'll talk about what we did there. But you can see at JP Morgan, they got multiple committees. And as you read it, you're trying to figure out what does one do versus the other. I think you're going to find it's a little convoluted. There's a little overlap. It's a little confusing on who does what. So that's fine in your paper. I realize this is a difficult paper. They're going to use a lot of jargon. You're going to get frustrated. You may want to copy and paste and email me a paragraph and say, what are they saying here? I can't make heads or tails of this. It is challenging. That's part of what I want you to see, is these banks are quite complicated. JP Morgan is a very complicated firm. It's got a lot of risk. It's a $3 trillion bank, or at least last time I checked, it might be larger than that now. It's massive bank. In fact, let's look at it real quick, because it is pretty amazing how big entities are. So JP Morgan is the biggest one in the US. And if you look at their balance sheet, it's a little scary. As a taxpayer, to me, it's a little scary. You got an entity whose assets are, let's see if this comes up here. Assets are $3.9 trillion, but their net worth is only $328 billion. If you look at Walmart or Apple, anybody else, they don't have net worth that's only 10% of their assets. They have net worth that's 40, 50% of their assets. A typical debt to equity is, 1-to-1 or 2-to-1. But these banks, they have more than, their net worth is less than 10% of their assets. Their assets more than 10 times the size of their net worth. There's not much cushion there, and it's $3.9 trillion. That's bigger than a lot of economies. And so, yeah, it is a massive organization. So obviously it's going to be complicated. An entity like this, you're not going to understand it um, with a casual reading at all. It's gonna take some reading and struggles with jargon. I will help you in class. You're going to discover in class that a lot of their jargon, they're doing the same thing, but they're calling it three different things, and I'll help you with that so you can see how to understand those. So I'm going to help you with those. But understanding what the board does, what the audit committee does, what these other groups does, that's part of what you're doing. Here's another one of their list of risk. So our focus is on market risk. I used to do this paper on market risk and credit risk, and you'll see why I don't do credit risk now, because credit risk is so massive. It would take you the entire semester just to do credit risk. So I'm focusing in on market risk. It can get confusing because sometimes liquidity risk is part of market risk, so it can get confusing. So you got the introductory side, and then they get into the first risk. So in this part of the paper, I would still go through this part of the paper, but you're not writing your paper on capital risk management, on strategic risk. I would read through it at a high level, kind of skim through it and see the kind of things they're doing, but your focus is going to be on market risk. Let me show you the credit risk section so you can see why we're not doing credit risk. Um, you're seeing some stuff that looks pretty complex. They're talking about their capital ratios and the Basel Accords and all of that. That's something, if you're interviewing for a bank, if you're going to interview with Frost Bank, I would go Google Basel Accords and read about them, read about the bank capital standards, understand those, read about the stress testing. We'll talk about some of that in this class, definitely. But it looks pretty complex, doesn't it? Here's all their tier one capital ratios and all the things the regulators require. So a lot of tables and charts. And you're probably seeing a lot of jargon. Here's liquidity risk management. That one you probably want to read a little bit more closely. There's a close tie between liquidity risk and market risk, mainly because if there's a liquidity crisis like we saw in 2008, the prices of everything falls, which is a market risk. So liquidity risk causes a market risk. So they tend to be fairly closely related. And see right there, there's a stress test. So let me help you out right now on something. So write this down as you're reading this. This is really critical. Your organization for the paper, you got the overview and players and philosophy and process and committees, yeah, all of that. But on the process, what we're looking at here is, remember this, we're going to talk about this a lot. It's define, measure, mitigate, or model. How do they define market risk? What is their definition? How do they measure market risk? I'm going to give you several measurements: value at risk, stress testing. Those are the two main ones. How do they mitigate it? I'll tell you the main ones on that. It's diversification, it's derivatives, it's well, we'll see some of the kind of they use different terms, whether it's risk budgets or risk capacity or the terms they use. We'll see the terms they use. Every firm has a slightly different one. They almost all use value at risk. So all of you are going to talk about stress test and value at risk. How many of y'all have had value at risk already? Are any of y'all that have never had value at risk in this class? Is that true? I don't know if y'all want to admit that, but anybody want to say they've never had value at risk? No one's speaking up, so well, we're not going to skip that part of the class if you have had it before. So
I haven't
Um,
had it yet.
you haven't seen it yet, Dante? Yeah, so we'll cover it in detail. That's a big part of this class. You're going to notice all six of those banks' value risk is massive in their annual report. It's something you definitely want to understand if you're going to interview. USA uses value risk, but they don't call it that. They call it probable maximum loss, or it's very, very similar. I was very, very central in USA's probable maximum loss calculation, so I'll talk some about that. I have a little bit of inside scoop on that. It's a fascinating part of USAA. Insurance companies and banks are heavy, heavy users of value risk. Walmart, Apple, Google, they're probably not value risk users. So this is really a financial industry side. So this is really what you're after. Um, how did that defines the easiest part? So if I go back to the annual report, liquidity risk, there's the definition. Liquidity risk is the risk that the firm will be unable, so you can see it right there. We're going to talk in our class that liquidity risk has changed definitions since the 2008 crisis. Um, their definition is the old definition. I'll give you the newer definition, but there's the definition. So all you're looking on the definition side is you could probably quote them, and then you say, I think what this means, or what reading other sections of the paper, what they're saying here is, or you can add to it. But the definition is the easiest part. Then the measurement is things like stress testing, and they define that and how they do that. Sometimes they mix measure and mitigate together. So measurement is how they measure what their risk is. Mitigate is how they reduce the risk. So a stress test is a measurement. A contingency funding plan is a mitigation. So I'm going to help you all on that. I'll give you the list of the kind of things you definitely should see. But that's liquidity risk. Um, I'll talk about how USAA did liquidity risk. It goes on for a few pages. USAA did this source of funding. We had our list of source of funding. So all right, so page after page. And then you get into the credit risk. Well, reputation risk comes next. We're not going to spend much time on that. Then you get into credit risk. They say credit and investment risk. I don't really think they mean investment risk here because that investment risk really goes on their market risk. But I don't want to scare you. I used to have credit risk in this paper. You should sigh of relief here because look at credit risk. It goes on forever. Why? Because that is the single biggest risk of a bank. Now, I know we're going to talk about some Silicon Valley Bank and its problems. They went under because of market risk, because of interest rate risk, because of really horrible management. We'll talk about that bank. Most banks don't go under because of interest rate risk. Banks actually manage interest rate risk really well. Silicon Valley is actually one of the few exceptions. Most banks struggle because of credit risk. That's what happened in 2008. It was credit risk. So I would love for you to write about credit risk, but I finally gave up. It's just too much. It's so important to these banks, and it's just massive. And you can see it just goes on page after page after page. They talk about their consumer portfolio. They talk about their real estate portfolio. They talk about the commercial portfolio. It's a lot of jargon. It's really, really tough for undergraduate students. But I do want you to look at it, skim through it. I want you to be aware there's a world of finance that you probably haven't seen yet. And if you work for a bank, this is what you're going to be doing. You're going to become an expert in this. You might be writing this part of the annual report. They talk about their credit separately versus other credit, auto loans. They're probably going to talk about securitization. The securitization is part of what they handle for liquidity risk and credit risk. But you can see tables and tables, information just goes on forever. You look at some of these charts that look really interesting. Um, here's a mitigation for credit risk is they use credit derivatives using the capital markets to help manage some of their risk. Allowance for loan losses is somewhat of a mitigation technique. It's being honest to what losses you have. It's kind of mitigation or measurement. And there are some places where something might be on the fence, whether it's a measurement or a mitigation. if you're not sure on that, email me or call me and we can talk about it. I have some students that will get really messed up. I have had students put value risk under mitigation, and there's no way value risk is mitigation. So there's sometimes I think it's absolutely clear. Stress testing is definitely not a mitigation. It is a measurement. So there's some that are really, really quite obvious, but there's some other things like loan loss reserves. You might be able to debate that which section that goes into. Here they talk about the credit risk of the investment portfolio. Um, you start seeing the word VAR. You're going to see the word VAR and stress limits. Those are two. VAR is the measurement. Stress limits is the mitigation. You'll start seeing these. Detailed tables. Here, a whole section on value risk. I don't think I'm in the market risk section now unless I missed the turn there. Oh, I am in market risk. All right, so you can see we're in market risk now. This is where you're going to focus in on. Here's the definition. Market risk is the risk associated with effective changes in market factors. So that's interest rates. Interest rates is going to be a special case of market rate risk. We're going to talk a lot about interest rate risk and interest rate derivatives. They talk about the process. Here they say measurement. Here they give you the list of the measurements. Looks like they got a bunch of them, but they really don't. They really have two. They have value risk and stress testing. What is profit and loss drawdowns? That's a stress test. What is earnings at risk? That's a stress test. A stress test. A stress test. So that's why it can get really, really frustrating. They use a lot of jargon and then it's all the same thing. Why do they have so many different things? Because they have different departments measuring different things and they use different terms. USAA, we did the earnings at risk and we did the economic value sensitivity. Those are the two stress testing we did. I'll talk about some of the ones that we did at USAA, and you'll see those same ones here. All right, so you're going to spend a lot of time in this section. This is a section you're going to read in quite a bit of detail. You'll see value risk very, very dominant here. And they talk about value risk, their models. You want to get into this in detail. When you're talking about the measurement on value risk, it will not be a paragraph in your paper. It might go on 2 or 3 or 4 pages, including tables and charts. All right, I want depth. I want you, when you get into an interview, if you interview with JP Morgan, I want you to understand value risk better than anybody else that interviews for that job. I want you to be over-prepared. I want you to understand this. This is really, really, really critical to JP Morgan. You need to understand it. These tables belong in your paper. We'll talk about these tables in our class and what they're saying. Here you'll see the mitigation right in the table. See this line that says diversification? That is a mitigation. What is diversification? That means they don't have all their eggs in one basket. They don't have everything exposed to interest rate risk. They don't have everything exposed to commodities. Everything's not exposed to currency risks. And so when you add up all the risk, they don't all mess up at the same time. So you get to reduce your risk by 42 million because of that. So you'll talk about this diversification part. So VAR is your measurement and there is your mitigation. All right. So that's why I say define, measure, mitigate is prominent to what you're doing in this paper. They compare 2023, 2022. Why would that be important? Well, 2022 is when interest rates shot up because of inflation. If they're talking about interest rate risk, it might be interesting to look at their interest rate risk in 2023 versus 2022. This is a good chart to put into your paper. Bank of America has an even better one. I really love it. We'll talk about this chart in class and what it's telling you. Banks do what's called historical value risk, which I don't like. We'll talk about that in class. At USAA, we did stochastic value risk, which I do like. I think it's much more sophisticated. You might get into that, and I'll define those before you get too far into your paper so you can be watching out. But most banks, in fact, all of these banks do historical value risk. You want to have that in your understanding on why this line is so lumpy the way it is. But it would be great, compare this line in 2022 because you'd see a lot more volatility in 2022. 2022 was a really tough year for banks and interest rates because they shot up. So those kind of things you're looking at. Now, some students get really confused on VAR backtesting. Is that measurement or is that mitigation? I'll let you read through it and decide. What does backtesting mean? I won't give you my opinion, but I will in class. But I want you to try to struggle with it first. Not every bank does that, but I think at this point, most of the banks on our list do this. But if you went to a Frost, you probably would not see that. At Frost, you might see value at risk. You might or might not, but you probably would not see VAR backtesting. So here they give you a chart on the backtesting. That would be a really, really good thing to bring into your paper as well. These are really great charts. I love what they put into here. Um, some banks do it better than others. And I do think Bank of America has some of the best charts, but they all have unique charts. Stress testing, you'll definitely talk about. We'll talk about the advantage of VAR versus stress testing. We did stress testing at USAA. I don't like stress testing. We'll talk about in class the downside of stress testing. You probably have heard that the Federal Reserve, or the bank regulators, do bank stress tests. They have a required bank stress test. That's something you could definitely look up. See how did your bank do at its last stress test? You could definitely bring that into your paper. That'd be really, really good. I don't know if I Google that right now, what I would get. So JP Morgan latest stress test and just see what articles come up. Did they pass? So since JP Morgan was one of 19 US banks that underwent stress tests to study potential performance and protect economic expectations, the stress test reserve coming from JP Morgan does not need additional capital. So I would find articles like that. This one's probably not a good one because it's probably written by JP Morgan. See if you can find one that's a little more objective than that, but definitely would be a good thing to add to your paper. I do give, so, about 20% of your paper is critical thinking. I do give critical thinking points if you go beyond just the annual report. You find some good articles, you find some good websites, find some good YouTube channels. These are big banks, so there's a lot of stuff out there on them. Um, obviously 2008 was a big deal. JP Morgan came out well. Citibank, people thought might go insolvent. I'll talk about uh, kind of the most stressful weeks of my career in 2008, the week that Lehman Brothers went under, that weekend. I'll talk about in class. Y'all might think how horrible that is. I'll give you the scenario where that actually worked out a lot better than it could have. That weekend could have been, I can't even imagine. I wouldn't probably be alive today if the worst case had happened. It was a horrible weekend. And Bank of America buying out Merrill Lynch solved a massive destruction of Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley. They're still in business, but there's a lot of talk. The worst case, I think Citi, Morgan, Merrill, Goldman all would have gone under in 2008 if Bank of America had not bought Merrill Lynch. So it was scary, scary, scary time. Um, so you have a pretty good stress test of 2008. When people talk about the worst case scenario, 2008 is about as bad as it's ever gotten, probably even worse than the Great Depression. Um, I'm not saying go back and look at how they did in 2008, but I wouldn't, I would definitely give you some points if you found something like that. I'm not telling you exactly what to do. That's where the critical thinking is. What can you do to find a way to add more information to this paper? All right. Let me show you a couple papers real quickly, and then I'll close it down just to give you a sense. Um, I like very, very professional looking papers. Some of you had me before. I like this format. I have this format on Canvas. I highly recommend you move to this format. You have a good abstract talking about what you're going to do, 2 columns with very, very, very thin margins. Use the narrowest margins. Um, if you have quotes, italicize them and center them. Make sure all of your tables are very crisp and well labeled. That looks pretty professional, doesn't it? Looking at them, and it's a pretty good looking paper. You probably wouldn't be embarrassed to have this on LinkedIn. I had one student that I know of in Houston interview, and she showed this paper in the interview, and they said, "Was that a group project?" She said, "No, I wrote it myself." That got her to the second level of interviews. They were so blown away. And this is a huge advantage. I promise you, go through the pain of writing this paper because I've talked to UT Austin students. I've talked to students at many, many universities. Professors have gotten really lazy. They hate grading papers. And so what they do is they do group projects. Why do they do group projects? They tell you it's because they want you to learn how to work in the teams. That's a complete lie. They do group projects because it cuts their grading down 80%. I'm willing to do the time to grade these papers. It's painful. It kills me. It's 20 hours of work, but it gives you a paper that most students don't have anymore. Something for your portfolio that you can show in an interview. And I've had students show papers from this class, and boy, it is huge. It gives them a huge advantage. So make this paper very professional looking and put it out there on LinkedIn. So get something that, if you don't have a portfolio on LinkedIn, I'm giving you an advantage right now to start working on that. You can see the introductory section that he does. That's a pretty lengthy section. And then he gets into market risk. So yeah, the intro section is pretty lengthy. And then he gets into market risk, define, measure, mitigate. That's how the paper goes. All right. So there's one paper and then just one more paper. Very similar format. Looks really, really similar. So get away from the one column and especially, oh my word, I beg of you, don't do double space. Nothing looks like a high school paper than double spaced. I know you say double space to get more pages, but don't do it. You look so unprofessional when you do that. Just stop doing that. Make it look like, and this is the format I started using many years ago. One student started doing this. He got the Financial Analyst Journal out and he just replicated their format. So essentially what he did is he wanted to publish his paper so it looked like something published in a journal. That's what you got to do for now for the rest of your career in college is write papers that you can publish. Some of y'all have already been doing that in my previous class that you've already got some good papers out there. All right, so I'm going to stop it there. If you know which bank you want to do, let me know. I want to define that between now and Thursday night so I can start kind of setting up times I can meet with your teams. Again, it's an individual paper, but you can definitely work together, share articles as long as you write your own independent paper. It is a tough paper. I'm going to help you as much as I can. Good news is this is the hardest part of the class, so you get it out of the way, get it done, and then you can focus on the other items. Any questions, comments? This is my favorite class, risk management. Really fascinating class for me because it's so topical. You might think you're a finance major or actuarial science major or marketing or accounting. You're really not. You're all risk managers. That's what we all do. That's what business is all about. It's risk management. Why is it risk management? Well, because you got to make decisions. You're making decisions about the future. Making decisions about the futures involves forecasting, which we're really horrible at. And we have a lot of biases, which means you're making a decision and you might is it possible you make the right decision and it doesn't go well? Is that possible? Is it possible you make the wrong decision and it's really, really great solution? We'll talk about that when we talk about Annie Duke later in the semester. She talks about it resulting, where we tend to judge our decisions not based on the quality of the decision, but based on the outcomes, which she says that's all wrong. You should assess your decisions based on the quality of the decision, which means good decisions can work out poorly, bad decisions can work out well. And we have to realize in risk management, our brains, our egos are set up to make us fail. Because what do we do when things work out well? We talk about how smart we are. What happens when things don't go well? We talk about how bad luck there was. And we do the exact opposite with our friends. When our friends have things work out well, what do we say? Oh, they're so lucky. When bad stuff happens, we say, yeah, that's their fault. They should have done better. So our egos are set up to make us fail. And so in this class, can we get better? That's why we're going to do some of these great thinkers at the end of the semester, like Taleb and Annie Duke and Kahneman and my favorite, Doug Hubbard. What do they say you can do to become a better decision maker? That's what it's all about. It's all about making decisions. If you do your entire career in finance and there's never a decision made off of your work, they're paying you for nothing. Your job should make a decision be made that wasn't going to be made without you. And that's all about risk management. So my goal is to cover the main tools and risks. This is going to be a risk focused category by category: interest rate risk, liquidity risk, price risk. We're going to go through the major ones. And what are those main tools? I do want you to be skeptical because finance has not done well in this area. If you look at 2008, especially, finance really messed up in 2008. We can go back and see not just bad luck, but really bad decisions that were made in 2008. So you should be skeptical. You should be a little cynical, not too cynical, but you should be skeptical. Academically Adrift, which is a really scary book to read because it makes the point there's very little learning going on in college, which scares me because we're spending a lot of money on this. But he says teaching students to think critically is the principal aim of education on the undergraduate level. And their argument is, now you can kind of question how they came up with this. Their argument was 40% of college students have no more education than they had when they graduated from high school. When they graduate from college, they're in the exact same position they were, 40%. And that was written several years ago. James Montier, one of my favorite writers, in the world of modern finance, the love of numbers has replaced a desire for critical thinking. As long as something has a number, then it's taken as gospel. We'll talk about that. The whole issue of model risk and how you make bad decisions. Sometimes we make bad decisions because the model is so complicated, it must be right. If any actuarial students in here, actuaries have that as an issue because their models are, wow, they're complicated. It has all these, 50 sheets and all these massive formulas. It must be telling us something good. But we don't step back and just say, is that even make sense? And then Peter Bernstein, another author I highly recommend. There's too much math and not enough thought about what risk really is all about. We have to make decisions with unknown outcomes. That's the forecasting part of it. So we have to think about consequences as well as probabilities. We'll get into that a lot when we talk about Taleb. Have y'all read Taleb? How many of y'all read Black Swan and Fooled by Randomness? Anybody in here? Okay, y'all gotta go out and read those books. They're really good books. Bernstein wrote Capital Ideas, which I highly recommend. He unfortunately passed away. I should bring his book in. I actually have his book with his autograph in it. He was speaking at a conference. I had no idea he was speaking at a conference, but I had his book. I said, hey, can you sign this book? I didn't know you're going to be here, and I've got your book. And he's like, yeah, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But I did get him to sign it. Really great speaker. He's an amazing guy. Like he was at an actuarial conference. There was only like 20, 30 people there, a bunch of actuaries, all these mathematicians. And he got a really technical actuary question. And so he says, well, I'm not an actuary, but I'll give my best answer. And then he gave an incredibly astute answer. Smart guy. He's a good person to read. What do I expect? I do expect you to come to class, be prepared, read class notes, do some internet Googling searches. We're going to hit some really complicated stuff, but I'll keep it somewhat high level so it doesn't overwhelm because it can get much more complicated. But go out on the internet and just see how much more complicated it can get. How many actuarial majors we have in here? Actuary science, we have a few of those, a few in here. Yeah, you should see what they do on interest rate risk. They blow finance people away. They have very advanced models, especially on the life insurance side, because the life insurance industry, if they mess up on interest rate risk, the whole industry goes under, and they have to know that extremely well. It frustrated me at USAA. For some reason, I have the CPA and the CFA. And if your accounting friends talk about how hard the CPA is, trust me, the CFA is much, much more difficult. And so I'm thinking, wow, this is the hardest exam I've ever done. I passed all 3 parts. It just blew me away. It was so difficult. Well, suddenly the life actuaries at USA started taking the CFA and they were hardly studying and were passing it with no problem. It just irritated the life out of me. So their knowledge of some of these complex stuff goes beyond. So get out there and see that this stuff gets quite complex. It can be overwhelming, but once you get a job in this area and you're sitting there 50 hours a week, you're going to learn it. You're going to learn some really complex stuff. So just be aware we can't go as deep a dive as we could, but go out there and expose yourself to what's really going on this. I don't want you on your phones. If you're taking notes on the computer, that's fine. One thing we've known that is you take notes by hand, you learn a lot more and remember a lot more than if you're typing. For some reason, typing doesn't stick in the brain the way writing does. When I was at UT Austin, I actually went back and looked at my UT Austin transcript. I want to see what percentage I have 236 hours of undergraduate. So I'm a really slow student because I changed majors my junior year. So I have 230, I essentially have two undergraduate degrees, music theory and accounting. There's not a lot of overlap in those two. But I want to see how many of those classes do I still have a lot of knowledge today? And it was over 50%. I had a lot of students say zero, but 25, 30 years later, I still remember those classes very, very well. My approach was to take handwritten notes. Then I went home and I recopied the handwritten notes. I marked something I didn't understand. I was actually hoping I didn't understand something to give me an excuse to go talk to the professor. And I did that every single class. And I think that's why it stuck with me. If I had computers and typing, I don't think it would have worked as well. Today, I would probably take handwritten notes and then go home and type them into Word and then go meet with the professor. You want an excuse to meet with your professors, so any excuse you have, go meet with them. So don't use your computers for taking notes unless that's just the only way you can do it. Try not to leave in the middle of the class. Let me know. Some students are really good. They say, hey, I gotta leave at 8:30. I'll appreciate that. It is distracting for me. Write incredibly great papers. I want to take your paper and run upstairs to Dr. Baynot and say, you can't believe an undergraduate student wrote this. And I'm in a good way. I mean, you can't believe it, but in a good way. Really good papers. The papers in this class, the projects in these classes work really well on LinkedIn. They're very high quality, complex papers. Especially if you interview with one of these banks, the fact that you did this paper will give you a huge advantage in the interviews. Be engaged, even look engaged. If you want your professor to give good lectures, then you should look like you're actually interested. I had a class last night. One student was on his or her phone the entire class. Irritates the life out of me. I don't know what percentage of y'all are smartphone zombies? If some of you are already dead, 5 hours a day on your phones. My phone's right here. It's turned off. There's been studies that shown if you have your phone sitting next to you, your comprehension goes down 20, 30%. If you put your phone in airplane mode, put it away, your comprehension goes up quite significantly. We don't know why that is, other than you're wondering, hey, does someone like my Instagram or whatever? And your brain's thinking that. You know that it's possible to look at your phone. Your brain will be distracted. It's amazing. I just finished the book. It's not one I recommend, but it's called Lost Focus. And it's scary what he talks about. He talks about the difference in high school students today versus 40 years ago, and the problems that they're having that we've never seen before. And a lot of it is social media. Try to become, I don't know how a zombie comes back to life. If you're iPhone zombie, someone said love's the only way to bring a zombie back, but there's no love in finance. So you're going to find another way to do it. I would recommend you find a way to limit your time significantly. I ride my bike every day and I do listen to books and other things, but I will also turn everything off, pick a topic and just think about that. Come up with ways, how could you do this better? One thing they'll say, especially when you're writing a paper, in this book, Lost Focus, he talked about that. You're working on your paper and say, hey, I'm going to go research this on Google. And in an hour later, what are you doing? You're watching cat videos. Why? Because the internet is set up to distract you. That's what they're trying to do, right? They're trying to capture your brain. They want to own your brain and know how to do it. And so one of my favorite writers out there on this, Cam Newport, he says, hey, set aside 2 hours to work on the paper and do not go out to the internet to research anything. If you need to research something, write it down. I need to research this. And research it later. That 2 hours should be no computer, no phone, so you can focus in on it. This is a big part of risk management. If you can figure out how to regain focus and eliminate social media so it doesn't control your life, you will be a far better risk manager. So be engaged. Trust what we're covering is of critical importance. I think it was several years ago in this class, we're doing a balance sheet immunization problem. And I remember one of the students down here, he goes, oh, this is just busy work. And this was on a Thursday. The next day at UTSA, we were doing exactly what we're doing in this class. We're doing at UTSA to make decisions about tens of billions of dollars. And I'm thinking, why does he think this is busy work? This is exactly what we do
There's not a single thing I teach in my class I did not do in real life in a job. So the balance sheet immunization is exactly what USAA did to make decisions about buying and selling billions of dollars. Trust me, if you find out 20 years later it was a waste of time, call me up. We can talk about a reimbursement for the class. But just trust me, I've been doing this for 30 years. I'm still definitely engaged with the industry. Just like tonight, having a call with an alum, a Zoom meeting with an alum, and just asking him questions. He said something. I said, "Wow, I didn't think the industry worked like that." He said, "Well, yeah, we're somewhat changing, so I'm learning from my alums now. So trust me on that." If you have expectations of me, let me know. What most irritates you about professors. The complaints I get about me is I talk too fast. I can't help that. I'm very hyper. So I do talk fast, but you can say, "Professor, slow down, give me time to take notes." I will definitely stop on that. One thing that irritates me that I haven't got too many complaints from students on is professors that are really slow at grading stuff. I'm a big believer that if you turn a paper out on Friday, you should have it back on Tuesday with as much detail as I can give you. But most students don't seem to care about that. To me, it's important. I've heard of students taking a multiple choice exam that they didn't get it back for 3 or 4 weeks. And I thought, what an incredible waste. What are you going to do if you miss maybe 80% of a multiple choice exam and you get it back 4 weeks later? What learning went on? What did you learn about the 20% you missed? To me, it seems like a waste. So I do want to give you feedback. Unfortunately, it's a big class, so I can't give you really, really deep feedback. But first of all, if you haven't had me before, you should definitely meet with me before the paper's due to make sure you're on track. Don't figure out you're way off track when you get the grade back, because then it's too late. But if you want to sit down with me, some students are not really good at just writing. That's not their specialty. And in finance, we do write an enormous amount. So you do have to become a better writer. You might even take a technical writing class here at UTSA, become a better writer. Some students can be good writers if they would just stop and think about it. So sometimes I can sit down with a student and say, "Wow, it took you 6 paragraphs to say what you could have said in one sentence. Why don't you cut this back?" So feedback is tough for me because the classes are so big. Some students complain because I require attendance. I'm not going to budge on that one, so you can just complain on that one. I think you need to be in class, be engaged. Yes, I've seen professors that allow students to do by Zoom. I see them in the FSC. The students are all talking to each other. And then every once in a while, they'll click in and ask a question just to make the professor think they're engaged. And then they're back to talking to each other. There's zero engagement. It's an incredible waste of time and resources. I'm just not into that. So if I'm going to be here, you need to be here, or just drop the class if you don't want to come to class and go find another teacher. Anything else that bugs you about professors you want me to not do? So y'all are happy with all your professors? None of them irritate you at all? All right, good. Perfect professors. On the papers, I look at coverage, clarity, and critical thinking. It's not exactly 40-40-20 because there's a lot of overlap in them. Coverage, I will give you a rubric so you know exactly what I'm expecting you to cover. It's just you're going to be shocked at how much depth I want. I really want you to cover everything that we talked about. Clarity is how well it's written. Is it well organized? I'm real picky on paragraph length because it makes it really tough to grade 60 papers when a paragraph. I think my record is a student who turned in a 3-page paper and it was 1 paragraph. And that's just horrible. Sometimes I'll pull up your paper in Word and I'll create paragraphs because I can't read long paragraphs. It just makes it tough to read. So, I gave you an example paper I showed you on Tuesday. So you could see, there's another example paper out there, not for this class, but for another class that shows you the format, 2 columns, narrow margins, that kind of thing. You don't want to write every paper now because you're building your portfolio for LinkedIn. You want to make it look like a publishable paper. You want to make it look as professional as you possibly can. And this is the hardest part. Oh, who was that guy, Anderson, that said, "I would have written a shorter paper, but I ran out of time." Your first draft should be the longest paper. You should be cutting back, making it more succinct as you go.
Before we go too far and pass the subject that you just asked about, you said you showed a paper on the Zoom. I don't know if it was a sharing screen, but I didn't see that paper, so if there's a way that you can post it.
I'll look at the video and see. I won't post the actual paper, but
Okay, yeah, I mean.
I'll post a video. If for some reason it didn't share it. Anybody else see it when it was there Tuesday? So yeah, it may just been a click on your machine, but it should be on the video. I'll put that out there tomorrow or Saturday. And in critical thinking, what professors want is students writing as if they're actually interested in the topic. I do have students, I can't believe in this class, I have students get bored. It's like, if you're bored in this class, then you need to change majors because this is what you're gonna be doing the rest of your career. It's all about risk management. But I do have students that are about to graduate that are already boarded here with finance. I'm thinking, how sad is that? They got to do this another 50 years and they don't like it. I love this stuff. I can get into it. I love USA invited me back to a party, years after I left. And it took like 10 minutes before all the investment people were in one room talking investments. And their spouses are like, don't y'all do this all day? He's like, yeah, we do this all day. It's what we care about, what we're interested in. It was a blast. One of my peers, I just talked to him today. He's got a new firm. He's looking to hire somebody. And just, it's fun to talk. You should be really interested in that. You want to put that interest into your paper. So phrases like this, your professors love these phrases. But make sure you don't just randomly put them into your paper. Don't write your paper and then throw these in randomly throughout. So a phrase like, I find it interesting that, make sure that's in a sentence that you're actually interested about, or even ask the question. Paper one's a tough paper. What did you find interesting? What did you find? What surprised you? I was surprised to see that. I wonder if. I was curious to see if. I was amazed. I question if. That's a really good critical thinking. I question if the internal audit function really has as much power as their annual report says it does. One of the questions I have, and this is one you can ask on paper one, our regulations have put a lot more pressure on the boards to manage risk. But you got JP Morgan. Who are their board members? Their board members, the CEO of Home Depot. What does the CEO of Home Depot know about banking? He or she's probably really, really smart about the retail. How smart are they about banking? And that actually even helped much. USA's board was a bunch of generals and admirals, smart people, but they knew very little about banking and insurance. And you're asking them to be risk managers. So I wonder if putting more responsibility on the board actually manages risk better, or if it's just fluff. Those are the kind of things you can ask. I think they should also consider, that's a great phrase for paper one. They should also consider blah, blah, blah. One thing I noticed with these banks is their committee structures, to me, for most of these banks, seems really confusing. I'm like, what does this committee do versus this committee? We cleared that up at USA. My department, my boss created a new committee called the Corporate Asset Liability Management Committee. It was the only corporate-wide risk function. We didn't have other groups reporting. It's called the CALM, C-A-L-M. We had 10 people show up. And then we got a new CEO, Bob Davis, and he goes, oh, I'm going to be attending that meeting. And guess what? Suddenly we had 50, 60 people showing up because the CEO was there. He got into it in depth. But one committee that did everything, and that's the way he liked it. He wanted one group to get together and talk about this. When I look at these banks and I see all these multiple committees and it looks like they're doing 3 or 4 of the same things, is that really helping risk management, or is that making it more confusing? One thing I loved about Bob Davis, we'll talk about Bob Davis in here. There's things I loved about him, and there's things that he still gives me nightmares about because he was a tough guy to work for. But one thing I loved about him was who's responsible. I want one person responsible. When this goes wrong, I want to know who that is. I don't want a committee. I don't want a group of people. I want to know who's responsible for this. He wanted to know where he had to go to get something fixed, and it was his approach. So should they also consider other things that make it stronger? What was a unique strength you noticed, or a unique weakness? Anytime you can say, wow, and I remember in class, professors really love this. I remember in class we discussed this. I think they're doing something very similar at this bank, something along those lines. That really helps a lot. Draw on other items, not from class I mentioned for paper one. Go find what Jamie Dimon saying on YouTube about risk? Not about generic stuff, but about risk. What's the CEO of Bank of America talking about risk? You can find YouTube is incredible. There's a lot of CEO discussions on YouTube that are just out there for free. Just amazing stuff. So if you see a definition, rather than just quoting it, you can quote it, and then the next phrase can be, I think what they mean by this is, and you put it into your own words. That's the critical thinking kind of things. So that's, if you're really not sure, I was not sure what they meant here, but I think it means this, that's fine. Some students come to me and say, what do you think they mean by this? Sometimes I'll know off the top of my head because it's a very industry-wide term. Sometimes I'll have to read exactly what you read because it's a term specific to Goldman Sachs. Not everybody uses that term. It's their own specific term. So it kind of depends on the context. So do your best reading. You're going to find, you should be reading starting right now on these annual reports. You should be finding that it's pretty technical jargon. It's pretty tough stuff.
So is the goal of the first paper to like figure out what they're doing or how to improve their risk management process?
You're not trying to improve it. You can certainly question it. Your goal is to really summarize it.
Okay.
What do they do? So your assessment should be there, usually at the very, very end. You'll see in the rubric, the very last section I want you to discuss, is this bank too big to fail? Is it too complex? So is JP Morgan a $3.8 trillion bank? Is it really too big? Could it go under? Could JP Morgan go under without bringing our entire economy down? So yeah, I do want you to do that type of assessment at the very end, but really I'm asking you to figure out what they were actually doing. Some good websites out there. Glenn Holton, we'll talk about him a little bit later. He has a risk glossary and he has some good articles. He has an article called Defining Risk that I really, really like. It's an interesting article. We won't use it in this class, but it's an interesting article. This site here, it's been a while since I've gotten into it. So let's see if it's still there. Just a second. So supposedly, and I haven't tried in a while, supposedly you can input your bank into that site. So this is a book. I think I've got it on our book list. This one right here. I saw this book. It's a book written by some New York Stern professors, not the motor end, but some other ones. And I thought, wow, this is going to be a really, really boring book.
Question, do you know if there's like a black beanie in here? I just lost it recently.
I don't know if anybody see anything. I don't see anything around. Oh, but you can look around, but. All right, so
Sorry about.
That's all right. You look at the title of this book and you think, wow, that's got to be a boring book. Regulating Wall Street, the Dodd-Frank Act. The Dodd-Frank Act came out in 2008 crisis. I found it a fascinating book. That was a really, really good book. It was a good read. It was enjoyable to read. So I highly recommend it. They created this website from this book. And the question they're asking is, does the Dodd-Frank, if it had been in place in 2006, would it have prevented the 2008 crisis? And their answer is no, it would not have, which is pretty scary. And they created this website to show you that there are things that you could have done in 2006 that would have prevented 2008. And that's what their website's all about. What measures should you do? So I'd be really impressed if some of y'all can figure out how to use this website for your own particular bank and see how they're doing. The other thing I'd recommend that you could do is, we talked about this on Tuesday, stress test for Bank of America. How did Bank of America do in their last stress test? Did they pass? Did they fail? So there are some things you can do outside of just the annual report of the book of your bank. I'm not saying go out and read this book, but it is a really, really good book. It does some really fascinating things. CMRA, near and dear to my heart. Let's see if their website still is working, though. It was down for a few months there. Yeah, it's still there. So I met Leslie Rawl in, oh, what year was it? 2002 or something? I can't remember. It's no, probably in the 90s before y'all were even, before your parents were probably even married yet. Um, so I was so intimidated. She and there's another woman that started this firm. So intimidated. The woman has left and they've hired these other people. So her firm is the firm that when a firm like Lehman Brothers goes under, they're the firm that comes in to try to figure out what's left, how to value things, really complicated stuff. So they're the people that are called when no one else can figure it out because it's too complex. So very impressive firm. I was sitting there with my boss and just like, Ron, don't say anything, don't say anything. They don't know you're stupid if you don't say anything. I was so intimidated by these two women who were very mathematical, very impressive. I don't know these other guys, Peter and some of the others that they've hired since then, but a very impressive firm. We'll look at some of their stuff. But really, really impressive firm. We didn't hire them. They were a little too advanced for what we needed at USAA. We hired another firm in town, but very impressive. And they have some really good stuff on their insight page. Emerging risk, which is really, really good. What are the risks that you should be thinking about that no one has thought about before? You know, the big risk I'm thinking about is China and Taiwan. I think that's a huge one. And President Xi says he will have Taiwan as part of China in the next 3 years. That should make us really scared. That seems like a really major world event. Could be World War III. Who knows? But what are they talking about? Using VIX to distinguish between transitory and persistent risks. That sounds like a really good topic. So she's got some great stuff out there. Anyway, so a lot of really good stuff. Hubbard, we're going to do a lot with Hubbard. I'm going to actually give you a class walk so you can watch one of his videos. I'm a huge fan of Doug Hubbard. I went through his class. I was trying to get them here on campus. They're just too expensive to do here on campus. But measure what matters, make better decisions. Exactly what I'm talking about. It's all about making better decisions. What a lot of firms do is they already know what decision they make, so they build the analysis to get the decision they're already going to make. So they're backing into the decision, and he's saying, no, we can do much better than that. He is quite exceptional. So we'll talk more about him. I think he's one of the best. I highly recommend. He has 2 books out there that I highly recommend. How to Measure Anything or Everything. How to Measure, I think, Anything. And then The Failure of Risk Management. Both really good books. He's a great speaker as well, so I wish we could get him here. I called his firm to see if he'd come to UTSA, and the receptionist answered, and I asked the question. He says, I don't know. He's in his office. Do you want to talk to him? I said, well, yeah, of course. And so she transfers me in, and I'm like explaining to him. He says, well, I got to run to a meeting. How much time? And 45 minutes later, we're still talking. So I made him late to his meeting. You said it's pretty hilarious to go out on Amazon.com and look at his book, because if someone makes a negative comment about the book, he jumps in with 12 paragraphs to respond to them. And one guy, they went back and forth like 4 times, and the guy finally said, I give up. I'm just tired of talking to you. That's how intense. I'd love to get stuck next to him on a 5-hour flight somewhere, because he would be really fascinating to talk to. So he is a major leader in this area. So there's a lot of other websites, but those are all really good. Bernstein's books, Against the God and Capital Idea. Against the Gods, we're going to talk about. It's a book about the history of risk. So it's a really good one. We'll start with his. I'll give you a summary of some of his major items. But in this book, he talks about what were the most major discoveries we've had when it comes to risk management. And he goes back a very long way. Capital Ideas, it's what's the major discoveries in finance that we should be talking about. Things like capital asset pricing model, the efficient frontier, option pricing theory. So they're a little dated because he passed away several years ago. He's got a couple of the books out there, but those 2 books are really good. We're going to definitely be talking about Taleb. We'll talk all 3 of these books Anti-Fragile is my least favorite, but I love the concept he talks about. So, well, I can summarize Anti-Fragile in one paragraph, and you essentially what you need. But Full by Randomness is actually my favorite of the three. Black Swan's the most famous of them. Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow is a book you just have to read. It's a critical book for finance majors and actual science as well. Nobel Prize winner, just passed away here recently. One thing I highly recommend is go out on YouTube and find Kahneman interviewing Taleb. It's a fascinating YouTube. To see if I can even find it. YouTube Kahneman interviewing Taleb. See if it will come up. There he is. That's not the one. This is it. An hour, 18 minutes. I've watched it once. I should watch it again. So there's Kahneman interviewing Taleb. Kahneman is the Nobel Prize winner. Taleb's not a Nobel Prize winner. Kahneman is not a finance person. He's a psychologist, sociologist. What he has done over his life is take all the theories of finance economics and test them. Do humans actually act like that? And here and I think you'll agree with me if you watch this, you can let me know. Kahneman's supposed to be interviewing Taleb, and Taleb's supposed to be explaining things, but Kahneman in a few places makes Taleb squirm. He asks some really, really touchy questions. And one of the points he makes is, that's great, Taleb, you're a rich man, you can do that kind of thing, but most people in the world cannot do what you're recommending. So it's an interesting, so there's a few places where Kahneman will ask a question, Taleb completely blows up, he doesn't know how to answer it, and Kahneman says, okay, well, let's move on. And Taleb's over there squirming. So it's an interesting one, but two giants in our field. Kahneman's probably the bigger giant of the two, but Taleb's probably making more money off of book sales. So Kahneman, this is his latest one. I don't think he probably wrote that one. I think he probably just stuck his name on it so it could sell more, but it's there. I'm not a big Michael Lewis fan, but this is actually a pretty decent book where he writes about the history of Kahneman and Tversky, and he calls it the Undoing Project. It's a pretty good book, pretty good read. I will mention on Kahneman, and we'll talk about this as well later. Thinking Fast and Slow. Kahneman has done several lectures over time where he covers that entire book in the lectures. So you can actually go out. One of them I thought was pretty comical. He was the guest speaker, the commencement speaker at a university graduation. They introduce him, he gets up and he starts talking about prospect theory. He doesn't say congratulations to the graduates and to your families. No, he just starts talking about, well, in prospect theory, what I discovered was, and the whole audience is like, who is this guy? Why is he talking about that? But they have his Nobel Prize lecture out there where he covers a big chunk of the book. And then he has a TED lecture that we'll talk about where he talks, which I highly recommend. He talks about memory and happiness and memory and decision making, which is really fascinating. So he's a good lecturer. He seems kind of dry. He's one of those lecturers. He seems kind of dry, but as you listen to him, you're captured. You're really listening. He's not, making exciting gestures, and he's just telling you what he's discovered. It's really good. And so Michael Lewis goes through those two. Tversky passed away several years ago, but those two, Tversky and Kahneman, what they discovered. Annie Duke's book, I love. I got a lot out of it. We're going to talk an entire class about Annie Duke and what she discovered. Essentially, anybody heard of Annie Duke? She's famous for what? Famous skier, gymnastics, writer. What is she? Poker player. So what does she do? She took what she learned in poker and applied it to life, drawing a lot on Kahneman. What I like about her book is Kahneman is really theoretical. Annie Duke takes that and says, here's the practical things you can do, become a better decision maker. Really good stuff. So we'll talk about her stuff. She has two books. I think she has three now. Her first book was exceptional. Her second book, I didn't really get into her second book. It was like the first book over again. But I have to look at her third book. She also speaks at conferences, so you can find her on podcasts and presentations, and she's a very good presenter as well. And then Hubbard, there's my two books that I highly, highly recommend. If you had to pick between the two of them, Failure of Risk Management, but they're both really, really good. We'll spend a day talking about Hubbard. You'll actually watch a video for Hubbard and how he talks about how to do risk management better. I just read this book this last couple of years. You're about to make a terrible mistake. Again, it's all about decision making. Risk management, it's all about decision making. And then Regulating Wall Street. These are books related to risk. I have my book reading list out there. It has other readings that you can do as well, but those are the ones related to risk I think are really good. Have y'all read any of these books? Do y'all read books? I don't read them anymore in paper because I got floaters all over the place, but I listen to them on Audible. And then I'm texting on my phone. I'll have to stop, put it on pause, and collect ideas. I get really, the people I ride my bike and they're like, what happened to Ron, man? He's all excited now. But someone just said something I found really, really interesting. If you got a book that you really like on risks, send it my way and I'll definitely read it as well. It's a great, great topic, and it's one where we're not too good at it. So we need to be listening to people. All right, so we got some time here. Let's get some introduction to risk before we get into the actual number crunching. Do y'all remember the show Deal or No Deal, or is that too old? So there's a bunch of people, usually women, right? For some reason, so it's kind of bizarre. So a bunch of women holding briefcases, and the contestant has a briefcase, and their briefcase could have $5 in it, or it could have $4 million in it. What do they hope is in their briefcase? Well, they could just say, hey, I think I got 4 million. I'm just going to go to the very end of 4 million. They could do that. They're probably not going to do that. But each time they pick one of the people standing with the briefcase open. What do they hope that person opens? $5 or $4 million?
Lower value, right?
They want the lowest value possible because the bank is going to offer to buy their case. So here's one where it had one of the highest bank offers ever. I had this as a video, but it keeps disappearing. So it's one of those videos where they didn't have the copyright, so I can't show you the video. But she had, these are the ones remaining. $5, $300, $10,000, $25,000, $1 million, and $4 million. The bank says, I'll pay you $701,000 now, or you can keep opening more briefcases. So the big question here is, how would you advise her? Would you advise her to open another case? What happens if the next case she picks is the $5? What's the bank going to do? Higher offer or lower offer? Lower by lower. Higher offer, right? She opens the 5, she's got a better chance at 4 million. The bank's got to offer 800, 900,000 bucks. Do that. What if she opens the 4 million? The bank's going to die pretty dramatically. What's the chance? What's the probability the next bank offer is going to be higher?
After she picked 4 million?
No. If she's going to pick, what's the probability? You don't know which of these she's going to pick. What's the probability the next bank offer will be higher? 50? I would argue 67%. Anybody agree with me on that? If she picks any of these 4, the bank offer is going to shoot up. That sounds pretty good. A 67% chance. She's got a 33% chance that it will fall, and probably a 16% chance that it's going to fall a lot. If she picks the 4 million. How would you help her make the decision? You can help her with the probabilities. What information doesn't she know? Does she know what the bank offer is going to change to? She might have a guess. Wouldn't that be wonderful information to have? I've tried to figure that out, and I'm quite convinced the banker wasn't up there deciding how much to offer. I'm pretty sure he or she knew exactly what the next offer. I know in the TV show they delay it, like the banker's up there calculating things. But I'm pretty sure a second he knows what, or she knows what that is. Because I can't imagine whatever insurance company's insuring this, they're letting some Hollywood person and say, oh, let's make it 843. But I would want to know that algorithm. I would probably study that algorithm. So I want to know the probabilities, but I also want to know the distribution of the cash payouts. What if the 4 million, if she picks the 4 million, this drops to 690? Big deal, not much risk. If I pick the $5, it goes to $1 million offer from the bank. If I pick the 4 million, it only drops to 695. That's not going to happen. But that'd be really helpful to know. What if she picks the 4 million and 700,000 drops to 200,000? She's risking how much? 500,000. Would you want to know how much am I risking? I would want to know that distribution. If I pick the $5, it goes to this. If I pick the 300, I would want to know that. It's interesting. In previous classes, I've asked the question, how would you advise her? And I have students telling me stuff which has nothing to do with their finance classes. And it's interesting to me, a bunch of finance majors, this is a decision involving money, involving risk. That sounds a lot like what? Doesn't that sound like finance? Isn't that what your finance classes are supposed to be teaching you to do? And I find a lot of finance majors, they're like, well, I'll give her advice, but I won't draw on anything I learned in finance. I said, why not? Isn't this finance? But I agree. It's all, to me, it's about probabilities, it's distributions, it's it's decision trees. If this happens, I'll get that. Does that make it obvious what she should do? Probably not. Is it possible 10 different people would make different decisions and they'd all be right? And that's possible, right? They have different risk tolerances, different views of risk. One thing we do know that has been studied is when people are on these TV shows, they tend to be more risk seeking than they are risk averse. They tend to do things they would never do. I remember on this one, on the TV show, I can't remember which was which, but her husband and her father were there. One was like, go for it, go for it. And the other was like, no, take the money, take the money. So her advisors weren't really helping her all that much. What would you do if this was you? Is it tempting to take another box? You got a 67% chance of increasing this a couple $100,000. That's tempting, isn't it? But, all right, so the other question that you have out in your finance classes is this idea of the risk-free rate. What is the risk-free rate here? What's her non-risk decision? 700,000. All right, is that 700,000 greater than expected value or less than expected value here? What would you think? What's the expected value here? Y'all know how to calculate that? You remember in your finance class? It's real simple, if that helps you. Expected value is what? The median? What's the median here? You add these 6 numbers and divide by what? Divide by 6. Do you think the expected value is higher or lower? Do you think the bank's offering more than expected value? What does finance tell you? Is the risk-free rate higher or lower than the risk rate? It's lower, so this better be lower than expected value. But does she care about the expected value? Let's say the expected value, I think I'll give you all the expected value. The expected value is 839,218. Now in finance, we use the term expected value. What's the probability she is going to make 839,218? Pretty remote, isn't it? And if she goes to the very end at 0, maybe the bank will offer that. Why do we call it the expected value? That's not a very good term, is it? But she has a choice, risk-free of 701 or an average value of 839. So that definitely tells you how much that risk premium is. Is that enough to get you to open another one? So you see, you could use your finance classes to talk to about it. You're not going to get an obvious answer, but you can use that class to help you with that decision. Now she did take the 701,000, and then they asked these really cruel questions. What box would you have picked next? And the next one would have added more to your values. Oh, I made a mistake. I don't know how they know exactly which box they would have picked next. But she didn't have the 4 million at the end. She said, I made the right decision, but that's what Annie Duke says is resulting. If she had had the 4 million, people would say, oh, she made the wrong decision. She should have kept opening boxes. But does that mean it's the wrong decision? Is it wrong decision for her to take 7-1, even though at the end she had 4 million? Annie Duke says no. That's called resulting. You're assessing decision based on the outcome. That's the wrong way to make risk management decisions. If she knew she had the 4 million, then yeah, it would have been a bad decision not to keep going to the end, but she doesn't know that. So when you're making a decision where all you have is a distribution, the decision making gets really tough. You got to look at things like what are you giving up? But we always in finance like to have a risk-free option. We know we can at least get that. How much more can I get? What if the expected value of this was 500,000? I would say, yeah, obviously take the 700,000. That's pretty straightforward. We're going to talk about this later because I'm going to ask one of my favorite questions about borrowing to invest. It's going to be a big essay in the first exam. If treasuries are at 4% and you got a mortgage at 7%, should you keep paying your mortgage and go invest in the stock market to make 8%? What kind of return is paying off your mortgage? Isn't that a risk-free investment? You pay off your 7% mortgage, how much do you make? You make 7%. That's risk-free. Can you make 7% risk-free anywhere else? No, I'd say pay off your mortgage. It's an obvious thing to do, unless you're really confident the US stock market's really cheap. You know, the best risk-free rate you can get is 4.6% from treasuries, but you can pay off your mortgage at 7%. That's risk-free. We should think in risk-free terms, but I hear a lot of people, even in finance, say, hey, don't pay off your mortgage. It's 7%, but you can make 9% on stocks. That's not the right comparison, is it? Don't tell her, hey, don't take the 701,000 because your expected value is 839. Well, the 701 is risk-free. The 839 has a lot of risk. So we can't mix risk-free and risky together. Is there an optimal decision? Probably not for this person, but there probably is an optimal way for her to make the decision. Some people say, and you'll hear contestants say this, let's go for it. I came here with 0. What's wrong with that? She's not at 0 now, is she? Where is she right now? She's at 701. So that's a really bad decision. Right? She shouldn't say, well, I came here with 0. Yeah, but the world has changed. You're making a decision based on what you know today. So don't make those sinking cost couplers. You know, make the decision based on where you are today. Another thing you're going to notice is how skewed the distribution is. The median is 839,000, but the median's only 17,000. So it's a very skewed distribution. That's going to definitely have an impact on the decision. So she's got a good chance of making more money. How would you make the decision? You as a finance major, that's how you're going to be helping your clients, how to make decisions in uncertain times. We're going to get a lot into this. I wish I could show you actual video. I thought it was pretty funny. So that's the traditional way to make and address risk problems. There is the non-traditional, the 2008 crisis. So here's where I'm going to maybe make you a little cynical, hopefully not, but definitely skeptical. How does finance risk management do in a crisis? And I'm going to argue that it's worse than bad. It does horribly. How do you handle risk management in a crisis? And I'm going to use a movie I really like to demonstrate it to you. It's the movie called Duel. Have any of y'all seen this? This is Steven Spielberg's first major movie. I think he spent $40,000 on it. It's a really good movie. This poor guy, this is Dennis Weaver. I don't know what his character's name is, but he's driving and he comes up this, he's out in the country, he comes up this steep hill and there's this big 18-wheeler. So he passes them up. So in his little Pinto, he passes them up. Well, the 18-wheeler doesn't like that at all. And so the rest of the movie is this 18-wheeler road raging on Dennis Miller. And so Dennis Miller, in this scene, he decides to use conventional risk management, which is what? You call the police. I got a road rager, come help me, all right? So this is 2008. It's probably August. And he says, I'm going to use conventional risk management. And let's see how that works out for him, all right? Can't see the go button. Where is it? Can I?
I'd like to report.
All right, how did conventional risk management work there? Talk about risks. Dennis Weaver, this was a cheap budget film. He was actually in that telephone booth. And the truck driver was told, if you cross this line, he's still in the booth, you need to drive off to the left. So that's the risk Dennis Weaver made in this. This is 2008. There comes a point in risk management where you only have one objective. They want to guess what it is. What's his one objective at this point? Before this, it was conventional, call belief. What is his only objective now? Survival. There comes a time where your only objective in risk management is to survive. And you're going to have to realize that. Now, you might think 2008 will never happen again in the history of the world. My guess is you're going to face something pretty major. When we talk about anti-fragile, what Taylor's going to argue is don't get yourself in a position where survival is your only choice. But I think he makes an argument that's really tough in our business. But survival is at times your only solution. And the rest of the movie is pretty interesting. I highly recommend. I want to give away the end. Do y'all want to hear the end? Does he survive or not? Spielberg does this great because you never see the truck driver. This is like a horror movie where the truck itself is the monster. You see the truck real, he made it look like an angry face, but you never see the driver once. It's just so well done. Interesting movie. You can see a lot of Spielberg in it, just in his camera work, but it's a good movie. But I think it's all about risk. So I won't tell you if he survives or not at the end, but you can definitely watch the movie. So there does come a time where you throw out all the conventional risk management. So for me, for 2008, I'm head of equity, so I'm investing in stocks in a market where the stock market at one point was down 50%. Very stressful year. And it could have been so much worse. So I still remember the weekend that Lehman Brothers went under. The Federal Reserve calls all these banks together, said, Lehman's gone, no one's going to buy Lehman. And remember with Lehman, they weren't just going under, but their balance sheet was really complicated. That's why they had to call in CMRA. Their balance sheet was really complicated. You're not going to buy Lehman when you have no clue what they have. It was just complete black box. You just didn't know what they had. Well, if Lehman goes under, then Merrill Lynch is going to go under. Merrill Lynch goes under, Morgan Stanley is going to go under. Morgan Stanley goes under, Goldman Sachs is going to go under. So the Fed is now like, someone please buy Merrill Lynch. No one wants to touch Merrill Lynch. Finally, at the last second, Bank of America makes a $30 bid for Merrill. Who knows why? They could have gotten them for $10 if they just waited till Monday. But the CEO of Bank of America is thinking, we're this North Carolina bank. No one gives us any respect. All these big money center banks. We think it's pretty cool. Bank of America is going to buy the, Merrill Lynch. So there's a lot of ego involved. Am I glad he did that? Absolutely. Because that next Monday would have been chaos if they had not bought out Merrill Lynch. So you think 2008, well, y'all don't remember it, but you think 2008 was bad. It could have been so much worse. It would just been toppling. Who knows what would have happened after Goldman went under? I don't think JP Morgan would have gone down. I had a swap with Morgan Stanley, so I was definitely very worried about it. And I wasn't worried about JP Morgan. We had a swap with them as well. But it could have been a lot worse. So who knows what your big crisis is going to be going forward. What Caleb argues in Black Swan is the world has changed. We're going to have like 10 years of nothing, and then a crisis, 10 years of nothing, and a bigger crisis, 10 years of nothing, and a massive crisis because we're so intertwined. And what's the big thing that's changing it all right now? Yeah. AI. We're scared to death of AI. I was reading Kissinger's book on AI. He thinks war is going to change in the future. That AI robots going to be battling each other, and then we'll get an email and say, you're now part of China, or they'll tell people in China, you're now part of the United States. And we'll just pack up and we'll start learning that language. It's really scary what AI is going to do. We won't have soldiers anymore. We'll just be fighting each other's computers. All right, so what I'm going to do next class, I'm going to give you a definition of risk management. And this is where we're going to bring in organizations, define, measure, mitigate. All right, I'm going to give you the backup the background discussion from Peter Bernstein and the history of risk management. Some terms you've had before in some of your, oh, here's CMRA's risk universe. And then at that point, we're going to get into risk by risk by risk. My favorite risk is interest rate risk. That's where we're going to do swaps, interest rate swaps, and balance sheet immunization. It's my favorite topic. That's the one big math question on the first exam. And then we'll get into the other. Any questions